drop the weapon! Now, do not move!
Officer, these are gardening shears. I'm on my knees. I am not a threat.
I said drop it! Get on your stomach!
I can't lie down. I've had spinal surgery. My hands are open. Look at me.
You're failing to comply!
No. You're failing to assess reality.
The scream shattered the suburban silence of a Tuesday morning. It didn't come from a criminal, but from a uniformed police officer standing on a manicured lawn, knees bent, service weapon unholstered and leveled at the chest of a man on the ground. But the man on the ground wasn't a threat. He wasn't running. He wasn't fighting. He was 72-year-old Marcus Thorne, and he was on his knees in the dirt holding a pair of Felco pruning shears. "Officer," Marcus said, his voice possessing a deep, gravelly timbre that had once silenced crowded courtrooms. "I am pruning my roses. These are gardening shears. I am not standing up until my knees allow me to do so safely." "I said drop the weapon," Officer Kyle Braden shouted again. Braden was 29 years old, a transfer from a rougher precinct, and he was currently operating on a surge of adrenaline that was entirely manufactured by his own bias. He saw a black man in dirty work clothes kneeling in the yard of a $3 million estate holding a sharp object. He didn't see the gray hair. He didn't see the arthritis. He didn't see the high-quality mulch bags stacked neatly by the driveway. "I am placing the shears on the ground." Marcus articulated slowly, his movements deliberate. He set the red-handled tool on the grass and raised his hands, palms open. "My hands are empty. I am rising now. Do not shoot me. Stay on the ground. Get on your stomach." Braden advanced, closing the distance to 10 feet. "Hands behind your head. Interlace your fingers." "Young man," Marcus said, remaining on his knees but keeping his posture upright, his back stiff with a dignity that seemed to confuse the officer. "I am unable to lie on my stomach due to a spinal fusion surgery I underwent 3 years ago. I am sitting back on my heels. My hands are visible. You are making a profound error in judgment." "You are failing to comply," Braden yelled, his voice cracking slightly. "I'm not going to ask you again." "And I am telling you," Marcus replied, his tone shifting from explanatory to judicial, "that I am the homeowner. I am unarmed, and you are escalating a non-existent situation on private property without a warrant or probable cause. Look at me, officer. Look at what I am doing. Does this look like a burglary to you? We got a call about a vagrant with a knife." Braden snapped, though his eyes flicked momentarily to the immaculate rose bushes, the expensive stone facade of the house, and the silver Cadillac in the driveway. "You fit the description. Black male, weapon in hand." "I am wearing a sun hat and gardening gloves," Marcus said, peeling off the leather glove on his left hand to reveal a gold wedding band and a watch that cost more than the officer's annual salary. "The weapon is a pruning shear, and the vagrant is a retired senior district judge for the United States Federal Court. Now I suggest you lower your voice, holster your weapon, and explain to me why you are trampling my begonias." The mention of the title federal judge should have been a bucket of ice water on Officer Braden's hot temper. It should have made him pause, reassess, and de-escalate. But for Officer Braden, authority was a zero-sum game. If this man was asserting authority, it meant he was taking it away from Braden. And Braden wasn't about to let a suspect, especially one who looked like this, talk down to him. "I don't care who you claim to be," Braden sneered, stepping closer, the taser now drawn in his left hand while he reholstered his firearm. "You don't have ID on you, do you? My identification is inside my home. I can walk to the door and retrieve it." "No, you're not going anywhere near that house. For all I know, you've got accomplices in there. You are being detained for trespassing and disorderly conduct." "Disorderly conduct," Marcus repeated, a dry, mirthless chuckle escaping his lips. "I am kneeling in a flower bed. The only disorder here, officer, is your breathing rate and your inability to assess context." "That's it," Braden growled. He rushed forward, grabbing the 72-year-old man by the shoulder and jerking him forward. Marcus winced as pain shot through his rotator cuff, but he didn't pull away. He knew better. He knew that any movement, any flinch would be documented in the police report as assault on an officer. Before we continue with this harrowing encounter, I need you to pause and ask yourself a question. If this was your grandfather, a man who spent his life serving the law, being treated like a criminal in his own front yard, how would you react? Drop a comment below and tell me if you think police training in this country needs a complete overhaul. And if you believe in justice, hit that subscribe button because we are going to see this through to the end. To understand the gravity of the mistake Officer Braden was making, you have to understand the man he was manhandling. Marcus Thorne was not just a retired judge. He was a legal institution. For 30 years, he had sat on the federal bench presiding over some of the most complex organized crime and government corruption cases in the state's history. He was known as the Hammer, not because he was cruel, but because he was unyielding. He demanded absolute adherence to the Constitution. He had once held a district attorney in contempt of court for 5 minutes of lateness. He was a man of precision, order, and absolute integrity. Since retiring 4 years ago, Marcus had turned that same obsessive precision toward his garden. His estate in the Silver Creek neighborhood was his sanctuary. It was a community of sprawling lawns, high hedges, and quiet streets. It was also a neighborhood that was 95% white. Marcus and his wife Sarah had lived there for 20 years, but Sarah had passed away the previous winter. Since then, Marcus spent his days with his roses. They were his meditation. That morning, he had been out since 8:00 a.m. He was wearing an old stained pair of khaki work pants and a wide-brimmed straw hat. To the untrained eye, or perhaps the prejudiced eye, he didn't look like the owner of the estate. He looked like the help. The chain of events began with a phone call from 3 houses down. Mrs. Gable, a nervous woman in her late 60s who spent her days watching cable news and peering through her blinds, had seen Marcus. She didn't recognize him. In 20 years, she had never bothered to introduce herself to the Thornes. She saw a black man kneeling in the dirt holding something shiny, and her mind immediately jumped to the worst possible conclusion. 911, what is your emergency? Yes, I need police immediately. There's a suspicious man in the yard of the Thorne residence. I think the Thornes are away on vacation. I haven't seen them. And this man, he's digging. He has a knife. A big knife. Is he threatening anyone, ma'am? He's looking at the house. He looks like he's trying to find a way in. He's wandering around the bushes. Please hurry, he looks dangerous. That was the information Officer Kyle Braden received. Suspicious male. Possible burglary in progress. Subject armed with a knife. Braden was already in a foul mood. He was behind on his quota for the month, and he had been reprimanded the week before for attitude issues with a civilian. He felt the department was going soft. He believed in aggressive policing. When he pulled up to the curb and saw Marcus, he didn't see a senior citizen pruning roses. He saw a suspect. He saw an opportunity to make a felony arrest. Braden's patrol car was parked at a sharp angle blocking the driveway. He had exited the vehicle with his mind already made up. The visual cues that contradicted the dispatch call the lack of urgency in Marcus's movements. The expensive gardening tools, the open garage door revealing a pristine Lexus parked next to the Cadillac were ignored. Confirmation bias is a powerful drug, and Braden was high on it. Marcus, for his part, had heard the car pull up. He had turned expecting perhaps a delivery driver or a neighbor finally coming to say hello. Instead, he found himself staring down the barrel of a Glock 17. Now, with Braden gripping his shoulder, Marcus felt the cold reality of the situation. He wasn't Judge Thorne right now. He was just a body, a black body in a space that an armed agent of the state decided he didn't occupy. Officer. Marcus set his voice steady despite the pain in his shoulder. I am going to ask you to remove your hand from my person. I have not committed a crime. You have not articulated a reasonable suspicion that a crime is afoot, which is the standard required for a Terry stop. You are currently engaging in an unlawful battery. Stop with the lawyer speak, Braden shouted, twisting Marcus's arm behind his back. Stand up. Now. I am trying. Marcus grunted, struggling to get his feet under him while being off-balanced by the officer. If you let me stand. Stop resisting. I am not resisting. I am 72 years old and I have bad knees. Let me stand up. Braden hauled him up roughly. Marcus stumbled his gardening boots, scuffing on the driveway pavement. He was standing now face to face with the officer. Braden was shorter than Marcus, who stood a towering 6'3" even with his stoop. The height difference seemed to annoy Braden even more. Turn around, Braden commanded. No, Marcus said. He turned to face Braden directly. I am not turning around. I am not being handcuffed. I am standing on my own property. I have offered to show you identification. My wallet is on the workbench in the garage 10 feet away. We can walk there together. I decide where we go. Braden set his hand, moving to his handcuffs. And right now, you're going into cuffs for officer safety. Officer safety? Marcus looked at the young man with a gaze that had made hardened racketeers weep. I am an elderly widower, with a pair of shears on the ground 6 feet away. I am not a threat to your safety. I am a threat to your career, young man. And I advise you to think very carefully about your next action. The air was thick with tension. Sunlight filtered through the oak trees, dappling the driveway where two men from two different worlds stood locked in a confrontation that never should have happened. Braden's ego was screaming at him to dominate the situation. Marcus's experience was telling him that this officer was dangerous, incompetent, and terrified, a lethal combination. Officer Braden hesitated. For a split second, the unwavering confidence in the older man's voice penetrated the fog of his adrenaline. Most people, when confronted by police, were nervous, apologetic, or visibly angry. This man was none of those things. He was disappointed. He looked at Braden like a teacher looking at a student who had failed a simple exam. But Braden pushed the doubt away. He had committed to this path. To back down now would be to admit he was wrong, to admit he had drawn a gun on a gardener. His pride wouldn't allow it. You're failing to identify, Braden said, reciting the statutes he had half memorized in the academy. In this state, if you are detained, you are required to provide identification. That is incorrect, Marcus corrected him instantly. You are referring to stop and identify statutes. However, under Hebel v. 6th Judicial District Court of Nevada, a suspect is only required to identify themselves if the officer has reasonable suspicion that the person has committed, is committing, or is about to commit a crime. Gardening is not a crime. Being black in a driveway is not a crime. Therefore, the obligation to identify has not been triggered. I am offering to identify myself voluntarily to de-escalate your confusion, but you are refusing to allow me to access my identification. You're playing games, Braden spat. You think you're smart. You think you know the law. I don't think I know the law, officer. I wrote the opinion on United States v. Callaway regarding Fourth Amendment seizure in curtilage areas, which is exactly where we are standing. This driveway is the curtilage of my home. It enjoys the same protections as the home itself. Braden blinked. He didn't know what curtilage meant. He didn't know United States v. Callaway. He just knew he was losing control of the interaction. You're detained, Braden repeated like a mantra. I'm investigating a burglary. You have no evidence of a burglary. You have a phone call from a nosy neighbor. That is hearsay. It does not constitute probable cause. Look at the windows. Are they broken? Look at the door. Is it forced? Look at me. Do I possess burglary tools? No. I possess pruning shears. The shears are a deadly weapon. So is your flashlight. So is my fountain pen. Context, officer. Context is what separates law enforcement from tyranny. Sir, put your hands behind your back, Braden yelled, deciding he was done talking. He grabbed Marcus's left wrist and wrenched it backward. "I am not consenting to this search or seizure," Marcus declared loudly, his voice projecting toward the street where a few cars had slowed down to watch. "I am complying only under duress and threat of violence. I am Marcus Thorne, and I live at 412 Oak Lane." "Stop shouting." Braden jammed his knee into the back of Marcus's leg to force him off balance. Marcus gasped as his arthritic knee buckled, but he caught himself on the hood of his own Cadillac. "You are making a mistake that will follow you for the rest of your life," Marcus said, his voice low and dangerous. "I gave you a chance, officer. I gave you 3 chances to walk to the garage, to verify my residency, to behave like a peace officer. You have chosen to behave like a thug. You're under arrest." Braden panted, struggling to get the second cuff on Marcus's stiff right arm. "For what charge?" "Resisting arrest, obstruction of justice, disorderly conduct." "You cannot arrest someone for resisting arrest if there was no underlying arrestable offense to begin with," Marcus cited almost reflexively. "Resistance requires a lawful duty to submit. There was no lawful duty here because your detainment was unconstitutional from the moment you stepped onto my property without a warrant." The cuffs clicked shut. The metal bit into Marcus's wrists. The sensation was cold and final. He had sentenced hundreds of men to wear these cuffs. He knew the sound well. He never imagined he would feel them while standing next to his prize-winning peace roses. "You have the right to remain silent," Braden began to recite, pulling Marcus away from the car. "I am fully aware of my rights under Miranda," Marcus interrupted. "I am also aware that you have not searched me incident to arrest, which is procedure. You have not checked the tightness of these cuffs, which is procedure. And you have not turned on your body camera audio, have you?" Braden froze. His hand went to his chest. The light was red. It was recording, but he hadn't announced it. "Everything you have done is recorded," Marcus said. "Every illegal command, every misstatement of the law, every violation of my civil rights. I hope your union representative is excellent, officer, because you are going to need more than a lawyer. You are going to need a miracle." Braden shoved him toward the patrol car. "Get in." Marcus didn't struggle. He walked with his head high. He saw Mrs. Gable peeking through her blinds 3 houses down. He saw a young woman jogging on the other side of the street who had stopped and was filming with her phone. He nodded to her. Good, he thought. The more eyes, the better. Braden opened the back door of the cruiser. It smelled of stale sweat and disinfectant. "Watch your head," Braden said, mocking a courtesy he hadn't shown minutes ago. "I will," Marcus said. "I would hate to damage the city's property. After all, as a taxpayer, I own this car too." He slid into the hard plastic seat. The door slammed shut, sealing him in. The silence inside the cage was absolute. Marcus closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and began to organize his legal brief in his mind. He wasn't afraid. He was furious. And his fury was a cold, precise instrument that was about to dissect the San Diego Police Department. The ride to the precinct was short, less than 15 minutes, but to Officer Braden it felt like an eternity. He kept glancing in the rearview mirror. His prisoner wasn't kicking the doors. He wasn't screaming profanities. He wasn't begging to be let go. Marcus Thorne sat perfectly still, staring out the window at the passing suburbs, looking like a man being chauffeured to a board meeting rather than hauled to jail. Braden turned on the radio to drown out the silence, but the static just made his nerves fray. He was starting to get a sinking feeling in his gut. The confidence of the arrest was fading, replaced by a nagging voice asking, "What if he is who he says he is?" "Hey," Braden said, looking in the mirror. "You really a judge?" Marcus didn't turn his head. He continued looking out the window. "I have invoked my right to remain silent, officer. Unless you are ready to unarrest me and drive me back to my rose garden, I have nothing to say to you." Braden scoffed, trying to regain his bravado. Yeah, well, we'll see what the computer says. They arrived at the North District Station. It was a utilitarian brick building that Marcus knew well. He had signed warrants for officers from this very station. He had attended retirement parties here. He knew the layout better than Braden did. Braden parked in the sally port and pulled Marcus out of the car. The transition from the bright sunlight to the fluorescent buzz of the station was jarring. Braden gripped Marcus's arm, parading him through the back entrance toward the booking desk. "Got a resistor," Braden announced to the room as they walked in. "Refused to ID belligerent possible burglary suspect." The processing area was busy. A few other officers were writing reports. At the main booking desk sat Sergeant Thomas Miller. Miller was 55, a 30-year veteran who was counting the days to retirement. He had seen it all. He was drinking coffee and reading a sports blog when Braden marched Marcus up to the counter. "Empty your pockets," Braden commanded. "Place everything on the counter." Marcus couldn't empty his pockets. He was handcuffed. Braden sighed theatrically and began to pat him down. He pulled out a handkerchief, a small pocket knife which Braden set down with a triumphant clack, and the leather gardening gloves. "No wallet," Braden said to Miller. Refused to give a name. Found him in a yard on Oak Lane with a weapon. Sergeant Miller looked up from his screen. He looked at the items on the counter. Then he looked at the man in the handcuffs. Miller's eyes went wide. He squinted, leaning forward. He took off his reading glasses. "Holy," Miller whispered. He stood up so fast his chair rolled back and hit the wall. "What?" Braden asked, confused. Miller ignored Braden. He walked around the high desk, moving with a speed that belied his age. He walked right up to Marcus. "Judge Thorne?" Miller asked, his voice trembling slightly. Marcus looked at the sergeant. A flicker of recognition crossed his face. "Sergeant Miller, it has been a while. I believe the last time I saw you was at the retirement dinner for Chief Henderson." "Oh my God," Miller said. He turned to Braden, his face turning a shade of purple that screamed high blood pressure. "Braden, get the cuffs off him, now!" "Sarge, he was resisting, I said get them off!" Miller roared, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. The entire room went silent. Every officer stopped what they were doing. "Do you have any idea who this is? This is the Honorable Marcus Thorne. He's a federal district judge." "Retired," Marcus corrected gently. "But the title is for life sergeant." Braden's hands were shaking as he fumbled for his keys. The key wouldn't fit in the hole. He dropped them. He picked them up. Finally, the mechanism clicked and the cuffs fell away. Marcus rubbed his wrists. There were deep red indentations where the metal had bitten into his skin. He looked at the marks, then at Braden. "You have injured me," Marcus said simply. "That will be noted." "Judge, I am so sorry." Sergeant Miller was practically bowing. "Please come into the office. Sit down. Can I get you water, coffee?" "I don't want coffee, Sergeant." Marcus set his voice hard. "I want the watch commander. I want the captain. And I want the digital file of this officer's body camera footage preserved immediately before it suffers any technical malfunctions. Do you understand me?" "Yes, Your Honor, immediately. I'll call Captain Reynolds right now." Braden stood there, the handcuffs dangling from his belt, looking like a child who had just realized he had broken the family's most expensive heirloom. He looked at Marcus. I didn't know." Marcus turned to him, his eyes cold as flint. "Ignorance of the law is not a defense officer, and ignorance of the community you serve is a dereliction of duty. You assumed a black man in a nice house was a criminal. That assumption just cost you your badge." The atmosphere in the station shifted instantly from routine bureaucracy to panic mode. You could feel the air pressure drop. Officers were whispering. Someone ran to get a chair. Someone else ran to get a first aid kit for the judge's wrists. Marcus refused the chair. He stood in the middle of the booking area, rubbing his wrists, watching the frantic activity with a detached, analytical gaze. He was gathering evidence. He noted which officers made eye contact and which looked away. He noted the time on the wall clock. Captain Reynolds arrived 4 minutes later. He had clearly run from his office. He was out of breath, and his tie was askew. Reynolds was a politician in a uniform, a man who spent more time at city council meetings than on the street. He knew the political fallout of this event before he even opened his mouth. "Judge Thorne," Reynolds said, extending a hand that Marcus did not shake. "This is... I don't even know what to say. An absolute misunderstanding. A terrible mistake." "It was not a misunderstanding, Captain," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the captain's bluster. "It was a civil rights violation. It was an unlawful detention. It was assault. And it was kidnapping." "Kidnapping, Judge, let's not... I was taken against my will from my property without probable cause and transported to a secondary location. That meets the statutory definition of kidnapping, Captain. The fact that the kidnapper was wearing a badge only makes it worse, not better." Marcus looked around the room. "I want to file a formal complaint. Right now. I want the forms." "Judge, can we discuss this in my office?" Reynolds pleaded, glancing at the other officers who were watching avidly. "We can sort this out. We can drive you home. We'll take care of the ticket, obviously. There's no need to make this a federal case." "It is already a federal case, Captain. Literally. I am a federal official, retired or not. And the deprivation of rights under color of law is a federal crime under Title 18, Section 242. Marcus stepped closer to the captain. "You want to sweep this under the rug. I understand that instinct. But you need to understand mine. I spent 30 years ensuring that the law applied equally to everyone. To the drug dealer and the senator. To the pauper and the police officer. Today, your officer decided the law didn't apply to him. He decided his bias was the law. If I let you sort this out quietly, I am betraying my oath." He pointed a long finger at Braden, who was standing in the corner looking pale and sick. "That man," Marcus said, "is a danger to the public. How many others has he done this to? How many young men who didn't know their rights, who didn't have my background, who ended up with a resisting charge because they asked, why? I am not filing this complaint for me, Captain. I am filing it for them." The captain's shoulders slumped. He knew he was beaten. He knew who Marcus Thorne was. This wasn't a man who made idle threats. This was a man who had dismantled cartels. "Okay," Reynolds said quietly. "Okay. Sergeant Miller, get the forms. Pull the footage. Start the IA notification. And I want photographs of these injuries," Marcus added, holding up his wrists. "Now!" As the camera flashed, documenting the bruises on the old man's skin, Marcus felt a wave of exhaustion hit him. His adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the aches of his age. But he stood tall. He thought of his wife, Sarah. She would have been furious. She would have burned this station down with her words. He would do it with the law. "Officer Braden," Marcus said, not looking at the young man, "I suggest you call your family. Tell them you're going to be looking for a new line of work, because when I am done with you, you won't be qualified to guard a parking lot." Have you ever seen someone in power realize they've messed with the wrong person? It's a satisfying moment, isn't it? But remember, for every Marcus Thorne who can fight back, there are thousands who can't. That's the tragedy here. If you think police should be required to carry personal liability insurance so taxpayers don't foot the bill for their misconduct, type accountability in the comments right now. The next hour was a masterclass in bureaucratic backpedaling. The chief of police was on the phone. The mayor was notified. The station, usually a place of loud banter and activity, was as quiet as a church. Marcus sat in the captain's office, but he didn't sit in the guest chair. He sat at the conference table, turning it into his temporary bench. He had a notepad and was writing furiously. "Judge," Captain Reynolds said, entering with a bottle of water, "Chief Callahan wants to speak with you." "Tell him I am busy," Marcus said without looking up. "I am drafting my statement of facts while my memory is fresh. I will speak to him when I have filed my affidavit." "Judge, please. The chief wants to apologize personally." "Apologies are for accidents, Captain. This was not an accident. This was a choice." Marcus put the pen down. "I want to know Officer Braden's disciplinary history. Now." "I can't release personnel records without—" "Don't lie to me, Reynolds. I know the disclosure laws, and I know that under the Brady rule, if he has a history of dishonesty or bias, it's public record for any case he's testified in. Does he—" Reynolds sighed. He rubbed his temples. "He has 4 complaints in 2 years. 4. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "Excessive force, rudeness, unlawful search, and the disposition, unfounded or exonerated due to policy compliance." "Of course," Marcus said bitterly. "Investigated by his friends, cleared by his friends. This is exactly why I am not letting this go. You have a predator with a badge and you have been protecting him." Marcus stood up. "I am leaving now. I will be calling an Uber. Do not offer me a ride. I do not feel safe in your vehicles." "Judge, that's not necessary. We can—" "I said no." Marcus walked out of the office. He walked past the booking desk. Sergeant Miller stood up out of respect. Marcus nodded to him. "Sergeant, you are a good man. You should have taught your rookie better." "I know, Judge. I'm sorry." As Marcus walked out the front doors into the afternoon sun, the media was already arriving. The girl who had been jogging, the one who filmed the arrest, had posted the video. It had been online for 2 hours. It already had 50,000 views. A reporter with a microphone ran up to him. "Judge Thorne, Judge Thorne, is it true you were arrested for gardening?" Marcus stopped. He looked at the camera. He adjusted his straw hat, which Sergeant Miller had retrieved for him. "I was not arrested for gardening," Marcus said, his voice projecting clearly. "I was arrested for existing while black in a neighborhood that Officer Braden felt I did not belong in. I was arrested because our police force has replaced protect and serve with dominate and control. And yes, I intend to sue, not for the money, but to ensure that Officer Braden serves as an example to every other officer who thinks the Constitution is optional." He got into the waiting Uber. The car pulled away, leaving the scrambling reporters and the terrified police command staff in his wake. The lawsuit, Thorne v. City of San Diego et al., was filed 48 hours later. It was not a standard template lawsuit. It was a 25-page indictment of the entire policing system, written with the sharpness and clarity that only a federal judge could muster. It alleged violations of the Fourth Amendment unlawful seizure, First Amendment retaliation for speech, and 14th Amendment equal protection. But it went deeper. Marcus's legal team, led by his former law clerk, who was now a top civil rights attorney, subpoenaed 5 years of data from the department. They found what they were looking for. Officer Braden stopped black motorists at a rate 3 times higher than white motorists. He used force in 40% of his arrests involving minorities compared to 5% involving whites. The body camera footage was released to the public. It was damning. The audio of Braden screaming, "Drop the weapon," while Marcus calmly held the shears, became a viral soundbite. The contrast between the hysterical young officer and the composed, articulate older man was striking. Cable news picked it up. "The Judge and the Gardener" became the headline. Talk shows debated it. Police unions tried to defend Braden, saying he followed training regarding armed subjects. Marcus went on one interview. Just one. 60 minutes. "Judge Thorne," the interviewer asked. "Some say the officer was just scared. He saw a weapon. He made a split-second decision." "Fear," Marcus replied, leaning forward in his chair, "is not an excuse for incompetence. If a surgeon is scared during surgery and cuts the wrong artery, they are liable. If a pilot is scared of a storm and crashes the plane, they are liable. Only in policing do we accept 'I was scared' as a license to violate the Constitution. If you are too frightened to distinguish between a 70-year-old gardener and a violent threat, you do not have the temperament to carry a gun." The interview was the final nail in the coffin. The public outcry was deafening. The city manager told the police chief to settle the case immediately or find a new job. Internal Affairs, under pressure from the DOJ, who had opened a probe based on Marcus's complaint, finally did a real investigation. They found that Braden had lied on his report. He had claimed Marcus lunged at him. The video showed Marcus was on his knees. He claimed Marcus refused to identify. The audio proved Marcus offered to get his ID multiple times. Lying on a report is a Brady violation. It's a career ender. 6 weeks after the incident, Officer Kyle Braden was fired. Not suspended. Fired. The union didn't even fight it. The evidence was too overwhelming. The settlement was finalized 3 months later. The city agreed to pay Marcus Thorne $2.5 million. It was one of the largest individual settlements for a non-injury, unlawful arrest in the state's history. But Marcus didn't keep a dime. On a Tuesday morning, exactly 6 months after his arrest, Marcus stood at a podium in front of the city hall. He looked older. The stress of the fight had taken a toll, but his eyes were bright. "I am donating the entirety of this settlement," Marcus announced to the crowd. "It will fund the Thorne Legal Defense Initiative, a nonprofit dedicated to providing top-tier legal representation to elderly and low-income citizens who have been victims of police misconduct. Because justice should not depend on whether you know the case law. It should not depend on whether you are a retired judge. It is a right, not a privilege." He stepped down from the podium to thunderous applause, but he didn't stay for the reception. He got into his car and drove home. Back at 412 Oak Lane, the garden was in bloom. The peace roses, which he had been pruning that fateful morning, were now fully open, their petals a blend of soft yellow and pink. Marcus changed into his gardening clothes. He put on his straw hat. He walked out to the driveway. He stood in the exact spot where he had been handcuffed. He looked at the ground. The physical scars on his wrists had faded to thin white lines, but the memory was still there. He looked down the street. Mrs. Gable was in her window. She saw him. She waved tentatively, looking embarrassed. Marcus didn't wave back. He simply nodded a slow, solemn acknowledgement of her presence, and then turned his back. He knelt down in the dirt. He picked up his shears. The sun was warm on his back. The smell of mulch and blooming flowers filled the air. It was quiet. Marcus Thorne was not just a survivor of the system. He was a corrector of it. He had used his power, his privilege, and his pain to force a change. He knew Braden was gone. He knew the department was implementing new implicit bias training. He knew the world was slightly incrementally better. But as he clipped a dead leaf from the rosebush, he sighed. He knew that for every victory like his, there were 1,000 silent defeats. He clipped another leaf. Snip. Snip. The work wasn't done. The garden always needed tending, just like the law, just like the country. He worked until the sun went down, a free man in his own home, watching the shadows lengthen over the land he had fought so hard to keep. This story serves as a chilling reminder that titles, suits, and accomplishments are no shield against prejudice. Judge Thorne had the knowledge and resources to fight back, but what about the millions who don't? What about the people who are intimidated into silence? Justice isn't just about punishing the bad guys. It's about protecting the innocent. It took a federal judge to prove that a black man gardening isn't a crime. That shouldn't be the standard. Thank you for reading this story. It's a heavy one, but it's necessary. If this story moved you, please share it. Let's keep the conversation going. Do you think the settlement was enough? What would you have done in Judge Thorne's shoes? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that challenge the way we see the world. Until next time, stay safe and know your rights.
Last warning! Get on the ground, now!
I am on my own property. Articulate the crime, officer, right now.
You're refusing lawful orders!
There is no lawful order without reasonable suspicion. Put the weapon away.
Turn around! You're under
I
arrest!
am not resisting. This is an unlawful arrest on my curtilage.
The young officer whose name tag read Miller didn't care about the Constitution. He cared about authority. And he didn't like the tone of the woman standing above him. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't screaming. She was speaking with the icy, terrifying calm of a woman who had spent 30 years destroying arguments in federal courtrooms. But Officer Miller didn't know that. He didn't know that the woman in the gardening hat and cardigan was Eleanor Vance. He didn't know she was the section chief for the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. He didn't know that she had personally overseen the consent decrees of 3 major police departments in the last decade. All he saw was a 58-year-old black woman in an upscale neighborhood where he believed she didn't belong, refusing to do what she was told. "Last warning." Miller shouted, his hand dropping to the taser on his belt. "Get on the ground." "I am not getting on the ground. I am standing on my curtilage. You have no jurisdiction to order me about on my own private property without reasonable suspicion of a crime. Articulate the crime, officer. Right now. Articulate it." Before we watch this situation spiral into an absolute legal nightmare for this department, I need you to do something. Stop what you're doing and drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from, your city, your state. And if you believe that a person's home is their castle and that police overreach needs to be stopped, hit that subscribe button right now. You are not going to believe the level of arrogance you are about to witness. This story is going to make your blood boil, but you need to see how it ends. Eleanor Vance had worked hard for this piece. She handled the toughest prosecution cases in Washington, D.C. She dealt with hate crimes, systemic corruption, and human trafficking. Her weekends in this quiet, leafy suburb were her sanctuary. She had lived in the colonial-style house for 12 years. Her neighbors knew her. The mailman knew her. But Officer Kyle Miller, 28 years old and transferred to this precinct only 3 months ago, did not know her. And he wasn't interested in learning. He was interested in domination. The dispatch call had been vague, a suspicious person report from a neighbor 2 streets over who claimed to see someone lurking on porches. That was it. No description of a crime, no broken windows, just a bias-based call about a person looking out of place. Miller had driven down the street, seen Eleanor standing on her porch examining a hanging fern, and decided she was the suspect. "You're under arrest for trespassing and disorderly conduct," Miller yelled, unholstering his taser and pointing it directly at her chest. Eleanor didn't flinch. She looked down at the red laser dot on her cardigan. She looked back up at Miller. "You are pointing a less lethal weapon at a senior federal official on her own property." "You have qualified immunity only insofar as your actions are reasonable. This is not reasonable. Put that weapon away before you commit a felony." To understand the gravity of what was happening, we have to rewind just 20 minutes. It was a perfect Saturday morning, the kind of morning people work 40 years to enjoy. Eleanor had woken up early, made a pot of French press coffee, and put on her old gardening clothes, a comfortable pair of linen slacks, and a loose sweater. She had been pruning the hydrangeas. She had waved to Mr. Henderson across the street as he walked his golden retriever. It was the definition of suburban tranquility. She had just walked up the steps to sit on her porch swing and check her emails from the Attorney General's office when the cruiser screeched to a halt in front of her driveway. Now that peace was shattered. "I need to see some ID," Miller barked, stepping onto the first step of her walkway. "You need to prove you live here." "I don't need to prove anything to you," Eleanor said, her voice projecting clearly. She knew the law better than she knew her own children's birthdays. "This is a consensual encounter until you establish reasonable suspicion. You cannot demand identification from a citizen on their private property without specific articulable facts that a crime has occurred, is occurring, or is about to occur." Hybel v. 6th Judicial District Court of Nevada. Look it up. Miller paused. He clearly hadn't expected a case citation, but his ego was already too involved to back down. He felt the eyes of the neighborhood on him. A car slowed down as it passed. A woman across the street had stopped raking leaves. "We had a report of a suspicious person trying to break into homes," Miller lied. He was exaggerating the dispatch call to justify his aggression. "You fit the description." "What description?" Eleanor asked. "Did the caller describe a 58-year-old woman in gardening clogs pruning hydrangeas? Or did they just say black person? Because if you are detaining me based on a generalized description without corroborating behavior, you are engaging in racial profiling. That is a violation of the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause." "Stop with the lawyer talk," Miller snapped. He took another step up the walkway. "You're resisting an investigation. That's a crime." "Exercising my rights is not resistance. It is citizenship," Eleanor retorted. She remained seated on the swing, her coffee mug still in her hand. "I am telling you for the last time, leave my property. You are not welcome here. You are trespassing." Miller's face turned a shade of red that clashed with his uniform. He was used to fear. He was used to people pleading, crying, or running. He didn't know what to do with a woman who looked at him like he was a misbehaving toddler. "I'm not leaving until I identify you," Miller said, crossing the invisible line of the curtilage, the area immediately surrounding the home that enjoys the same privacy protections as the house itself. "You just crossed the legal threshold," Eleanor said, pulling her phone from her pocket. She didn't call 911. She opened the camera app. "I am placing you on notice. You are violating clearly established law. There is no emergency here. There is no hot pursuit. You have no warrant. If you touch me, you will be facing a Title 18 Section 242 investigation for deprivation of rights under color of law." Miller froze for a second. The specific code citation rattled him. But then he looked across the street. A neighbor, a young man named David, had come out and was filming with his phone. Miller felt he had to win. He couldn't let a suspect lecture him in public. "Put the phone down," Miller ordered. "No," Eleanor said. "I have a First Amendment right to record public officials in the course of their duties. You are 0 for 3 on the Constitution, officer. Do you want to go for 4? The air in the neighborhood seemed to stand still. The birds had stopped singing, replaced by the crackle of Miller's police radio and the heavy breathing of a man who was in way over his head. Officer Miller made a choice. It was the decision that would define the rest of his life. He decided that his authority was more important than the law. He convinced himself that she was bluffing. She was probably just some squatter or a housekeeper with an attitude who had watched too many episodes of Law and Order. There was no way this woman was actually important. Important people didn't wear muddy gardening shoes. "That's it," Miller gritted out. "You're under arrest." He holstered his taser and stormed up the porch stairs. The wood creaked under his heavy boots. "I am not resisting," Eleanor stated loudly. Her voice directed not at Miller, but at the neighbor David, who was filming from the sidewalk. "I am passively complying with an unlawful order to avoid physical injury. Witness that I am offering no physical resistance." Miller grabbed her arm roughly, jerking her up from the swing. The coffee mug in her other hand tilted, spilling hot liquid onto the porch floorboards. "Turn around." Miller shoved her toward the porch railing. "I am turning," Eleanor said calmly. "You are using excessive force on a compliant subject. That is a Fourth Amendment seizure violation." Miller grabbed her wrists and twisted them behind her back. He pulled the handcuffs from his belt. The metallic click-click echoed off the siding of the house. It was a sound that usually signaled the end of a suspect's freedom. For Eleanor Vance, it signaled the beginning of a crusade. "You are hurting my shoulder," Eleanor said, her face pressed against the white column of her own porch. "I have a previous rotator cuff injury. I am informing you of this medical condition now. If you continue to hyperextend my arm, you are liable for damages." "Stop talking," Miller panted. He was sweating now. He double-locked the cuffs, squeezing them tighter than necessary. "You're done. You can tell it to the judge." "Oh, I certainly will," Eleanor whispered. "I'll tell it to the chief judge. I'll tell it to the Internal Affairs Bureau. I'll tell it to the federal grand jury. Miller dragged her down the stairs. Eleanor stumbled slightly but regained her footing. She walked with her head high. She didn't look at the ground. She looked straight at David, the neighbor filming. "David," she called out clearly, "please email that video to my work address. Use the DOJ server." Miller stopped. "Who are you talking to?" "My witness," Eleanor said. Miller shoved her toward the back of his patrol car. He opened the door and pushed her inside. The back of the cruiser was cramped, smelling of stale sweat and vinyl cleaner. It was a humiliation designed to break people. Eleanor Vance sat awkwardly, her hands pinned behind her back, her shoulder throbbing. But her mind was crystal clear. She began to memorize the timeline. 10:14 a.m. Officer arrival. 10:17 a.m. Trespass on curtilage. 10:19 a.m. Unlawful arrest. Miller got into the front seat. He adjusted his mirror to look at her. He expected to see tears. He expected begging. "If you had just shown me your ID, none of this would have happened," he said, trying to justify his actions to himself. Eleanor met his eyes in the rearview mirror. "Officer, if you had known the law, you wouldn't be about to lose your pension." Miller laughed nervously. He put the car in drive and pulled away from the house, leaving the spilled coffee drying on the porch of the woman who was about to dismantle his entire department. The drive to the precinct took 15 minutes. It was 15 minutes of silence. Miller turned on the radio, trying to drown out the gnawing feeling in his gut. He was running the scenario over in his head, coming up with the language he would use in his report. Subject was belligerent, refused lawful orders, appeared to be under the influence, fear for officer safety. The standard buzzwords bad cops use to cover their tracks. Eleanor sat in the back, closing her eyes. She wasn't sleeping. She was composing the opening paragraph of her civil rights complaint. She was drafting the subpoena list. She was thinking about the Monell claim, the legal doctrine that would allow her to sue the city itself for failing to train this officer properly. They pulled into the sally port of the precinct. The garage door rumbled shut behind them, sealing them in the concrete belly of the station. Miller got out and opened the back door. "Let's go," he said. He grabbed her arm again, parading her through the intake area. Other officers looked up. They saw a woman who looked like their mothers or their aunts, dressed in nice clothes, handcuffed. A few eyebrows went up. Arresting a senior citizen from the wealthy district for disorderly conduct wasn't exactly the collar of the month. Miller brought her to the booking desk. Sergeant Thomas Kowalski was on duty. Kowalski was 56 years old, a veteran who had seen it all. He was 2 years from retirement and just wanted a quiet shift. He looked over the high counter at Miller, then at Eleanor. "What do we have here, Miller?" Kowalski asked, his tone bored. "Refusal to identify trespassing, disorderly resisting," Miller rattled off. "Found her on a porch over on Elm Street. Neighbors called in a suspicious person." Kowalski looked at Eleanor. He looked at her manicured hands, her expensive haircut, the way she stood, not slumped but waiting. "Ma'am, were you trespassing?" Kowalski asked. "I was drinking coffee at my own home, Sergeant," Eleanor said. Her voice was calm, authoritative. "Officer Miller decided that a black woman in zip code 20854 must be a criminal." Miller slammed his hand on the counter. "She refused to show ID. She was belligerent." "I asserted my Fourth Amendment rights," Eleanor corrected. "And now I would like my handcuffs removed. They are cutting off circulation." Kowalski sighed. "Uncuff her, Miller. We're in a secure facility." Miller hesitated, then undid the cuffs. Eleanor brought her hands forward, rubbing her wrists. There were deep red indentations. She looked at them, then held them up for the camera in the corner of the room. "Empty your pockets, please," Kowalski said. "Standard procedure." Eleanor reached into her slacks. She pulled out her keys. Then she pulled out a slim leather wallet. She placed it on the counter. "My identification is in the center slot," she said. Kowalski picked up the wallet. He opened it. The first thing he saw was a driver's license. Eleanor Vance, 412 Elm Street. "Miller," Kowalski said slowly, looking at the license and then at the officer. "This is her house. The address matches." Well, she didn't show it to me," Miller stammered. "Keep looking, Sergeant," Eleanor said softly. "Behind the license." Kowalski flipped the flap. He froze. There behind a protective plastic sheet was a federal credential. It featured the Department of Justice seal. It said, United States Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. Below that, it said Section Chief. And below that, a card with a gold stripe that read, U.S. Attorney General's Office, Priority Access. Kowalski stared at the badge. He looked at the photo. He looked at Eleanor. The color drained out of his face so fast he looked like he was about to faint. He knew what the Civil Rights Division did. They were the ones who came in and tore corrupt police departments apart. They were the feds that every cop had nightmares about. And this rookie had just dragged one of their bosses in handcuffs for gardening. The silence in the booking room was absolute. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. Officer Miller, sensing the shift in atmosphere, leaned over to look at the wallet. "What is it?" Miller asked. Kowalski closed the wallet slowly, treating it like it was made of radioactive glass. He looked at Miller with a mixture of pity and rage. "You idiot," Kowalski whispered. "You absolute moron." "What?" Miller stepped back. Kowalski walked around the desk. He didn't look at Miller. He walked straight to Eleanor. "Ms. Vance, ma'am, I am Sergeant Kowalski. I need to apologize immediately. There has been a terrible misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding, Sergeant," Eleanor said, her voice hard as steel. "It was a false arrest based on racial profiling and a gross ignorance of the law. Is the watch commander in?" "Yes, ma'am. Lieutenant Henderson is in his office." "Get him, now." It wasn't a request. It was an order. Kowalski turned to Miller. "Go sit in the break room. Don't speak to anyone. Don't touch your body camera. Don't write anything. Just sit there and pray." Miller, looking confused and suddenly very small, walked away. Kowalski picked up the phone and dialed an extension. "Lieutenant, you need to come down here, immediately." "No, sir. It's a situation, with a capital S." 2 minutes later, Lieutenant Henderson burst through the double doors. He was a man who prided himself on keeping a tight ship. He saw Eleanor standing by the booking desk, rubbing her wrists. He saw his sergeant looking pale. "Ms. Vance?" Henderson asked, approaching her with his hands out, palms up. "I'm Lieutenant Henderson. I'm so sorry for the inconvenience. We can get you a ride home right now. We'll expunge the arrest record immediately. Just a rookie making a mistake." Eleanor looked at him. She didn't smile. She didn't accept the handshake. "Lieutenant, you are not going to expunge anything yet," she said. "You are going to process this arrest. You are going to generate a booking number. You are going to take my mugshot." Henderson blinked. "Ma'am, I don't think you understand. We want to let you go. No charges." "Oh, I understand perfectly," Eleanor said. "You want to bury this. You want to make it go away so there is no paper trail. But that's not how the law works. Your officer arrested me. He deprived me of my liberty. If you fail to document that you are falsifying records, I want everything documented. I want the body camera footage downloaded and preserved with a chain of custody log. I want the dispatch logs. I want the name of the caller." She stepped closer to the lieutenant. She was 5'4", but she towered over him. "You see, Lieutenant, I'm not just a victim today. I am the evidence, and I am going to make sure that every single second of this encounter is preserved for the federal lawsuit I am filing on Monday morning. Now fingerprint me." Henderson looked at Kowalski. There was no way out. They couldn't refuse to process someone they had arrested. That would be another policy violation. "Process her," Henderson said, his voice defeating. And someone get me the chief on the phone, on a Saturday. Eleanor Vance left the station 40 minutes later. She walked out the front door holding her release papers. She didn't take the ride from the police. She called her husband, a retired surgeon, who picked her up in their sedan. He was furious, but Eleanor was calm. She was in work mode. As soon as she got home, back to the porch where it all started, she sat down at her computer. She didn't even change out of her gardening clothes. She sent 3 emails. The first was to the United States Attorney for the district. The second was to the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. The third was to the best civil rights litigator in private practice in the state, a woman named Sarah Jenkins, who Eleanor had mentored years ago. By Monday morning, the precinct was under siege. The lawsuit, Vance v. Miller and the city, was filed at 9:00 a.m. sharp. It was a masterpiece of legal writing. It didn't just claim emotional distress. It laid out a pattern and practice of unconstitutional policing. Eleanor had used her connections to pull the data. It turned out Officer Miller had a habit. In his 3 months, he had stopped black motorists and pedestrians at a rate 4 times higher than his peers. He had 5 complaints for rudeness that had been dismissed by Lieutenant Henderson. The suspicious person caller was identified as Mrs. Gable, a notorious neighborhood busybody who had called the police on delivery drivers, meter readers, and kids selling lemonade. The police knew she was a nuisance caller, yet Miller had treated her vague, biased report as gospel truth without verifying a single fact. The internal affairs investigation wasn't optional this time. With the DOJ looking over their shoulder, the department had to bring in outside investigators. They interviewed the neighbors. David, the young man who filmed the arrest, provided the video. The video went viral, of course. Not because Eleanor posted it, she didn't need to, but because it was public record in the court filing. The sight of Officer Miller twisting the arm of a 58-year-old woman on her own porch while she calmly cited Supreme Court cases became the most shared clip on the internet. Commenters were stunned. "She schooled him," one wrote. "He picked the wrong one," said another. But for Eleanor, it wasn't about internet fame. It was about the principle. The city attorney took one look at the video, then one look at Eleanor's resume, and told the mayor, "Write the check." There was no defense. None. Miller had violated clearly established law. He had no qualified immunity. But Eleanor refused the first settlement offer, and the second. "I don't want a non-disclosure agreement," she told the city's lawyers during a deposition. "I want a consent decree." She wanted systemic change. She demanded that the department rewrite its policies on suspicious person calls. She demanded mandatory training on the Fourth Amendment and implicit bias led by outside experts. She demanded that officer disciplinary records be made more transparent. And she demanded Officer Miller's badge. 6 months later, the results came in. The investigation sustained all charges against Officer Kyle Miller: unlawful arrest, excessive force, biased policing, and conduct unbecoming. He was terminated. Because of the severity of the civil rights violation, the state licensing board revoked his certification. He would never be a police officer again. The city settled the lawsuit for $1.2 million. It was one of the largest settlements for a single arrest in the state's history. Eleanor didn't keep a dime. She created the Vance Legal Defense Fund, a nonprofit dedicated to providing legal representation for homeowners who had been harassed by police in their own neighborhoods. The police chief was forced into early retirement. Lieutenant Henderson was demoted for failing to supervise his rookie officers. The department was placed under a monitoring agreement requiring them to report stop and frisk data to the state for the next 5 years. It was a Tuesday afternoon, almost a year later. The weather was turning crisp, the leaves changing color. Eleanor Vance sat on her porch swing. The hydrangeas were blooming beautifully. She held a cup of coffee in her hand, the same mug she had held that day. A police cruiser rolled slowly down the street. It was a new officer, a young woman. As she passed Eleanor's house, she slowed down. She didn't stop to harass. She gave a respectful nod, a wave of acknowledgement, and kept driving. Eleanor took a sip of her coffee. The neighborhood was quiet. The birds were singing. She had won, but she knew the fight wasn't over. She knew that for every Eleanor Vance with a law degree and federal credentials, there were thousands of people who didn't know the words curtilage or reasonable suspicion. There were thousands who got cuffed and took the plea deal because they were scared. She had fought for them. She had used her power, her privilege, and her pain to carve out a little more space for justice in this world. Justice isn't just about punishing the bad guys. It's about protecting the peace of the innocent. It's about the right to sit on your own porch in your own home and breathe free air without fear. Officer Miller had tried to take her dignity. Instead, he had given her a platform. He tried to order her off her porch, but he ended up proving why she and everyone else had the right to stay right there. What do you think was the punishment for Officer Miller enough? Or should he have faced criminal charges for what he did? And what would you do if an officer ordered you off your own property? Drop a comment below and let's get a conversation started. If this story moved you, please share it. We need to look out for each other. Until next time, stay safe. Know your rights and never let anyone push you off your porch.